Another aspect that I think is tremendously important is those photographs of the Earth alone in space, fragile blue world in this vast blackness, this vacuum, velvety vacuum of space. And it's clear, it's very thin atmosphere. It's so sensitive to the depredations of human beings. You look at that and you say, hey, that's only one little world. We don't have anywhere else to go. No other planet in the solar system is a suitable home for human beings. It's this world or nothing. That's a very powerful perception. Then, in the particular field that I'm involved with, the exploration of planets, usually by robotic spacecraft, there we have opened up a universe of wonders. We have looked close up at dozens of new worlds, worlds that we never saw before. And unless we're so stupid as to destroy ourselves, there are going to be people exploring those worlds. There are going to be human habitations on those worlds. We're going to be moving out into space in the next century. And I'm fortunate enough to have played a role in the first preliminary reconnaissance of the solar system. That's a terrifically exciting thing. Every human culture has a set of creation myths, but they're in the realm of mythology or religion or folklore, and they are, of course, all mutually inconsistent. Every newspaper in America, with very few exceptions, has a daily astrology column. Astrology is bunk. Astrology is fraud. How many of them have even a weekly science column? Why that disproportion? How much real science is there on?
Well, they say they're giving them, that's what the networks all say. We're just giving the American people what they want.
And that, you know,
and we're dragging ourselves down and down and down over the last 40 years. I know, I mean, I've seen it.
The great thing that is happening in our time is that we are able, through a method which can actually make some progress towards the real universe out there, to find out something about origins, and this is the scientific method applied to the science of cosmology. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I thought it was more important to address the issue of feeling unhappy because it wasn't immediately understandable.
Well, yes, I find that extremely soothing, actually, because it is a kind of sort of formidable task of grasping this that makes me want to retreat into trivial questions like, is this idea of predicting backwards going to put astrologers out of business?
Nothing will put astrologers out of business. Yeah. Global warming, the greenhouse effect. You put gases like carbon dioxide or CFCs, other greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere over this country. They don't stay over that country. Those molecules don't have passports. They don't know about national sovereignty. That's something they never heard of. The atmospheric circulation spreads those gases all over the planet. And so what one country does affects all the other countries. The solution to these kinds of problems has to be that everybody on Earth works together. The industrialized nations have the biggest responsibility because they're the biggest polluters. The United States puts more CO2 in the atmosphere than any other nation. But Western Europe and the Soviet Union and Japan and even the developing countries all make significant contributions. So there has to be a new way of looking at the future, and that is that we're all humans, members of the same species, on one fragile little planet. We're all in this together, and we have to work together. That's kind of the silver lining of these crises. They are forcing us to become a planetary species.
The story of Noah's Ark is, of course, a story. The books of the various great religions, Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic, Jewish, Christian, and many others, are filled with stories. That doesn't mean we are to interpret them literally, and there are all sorts of problems with the Noah's Ark story, one of which is kangaroos. How did the kangaroos get to Australia if you literally believed the story of Noah's Ark? So I'm sure you meant that in a light tone, and my response is likewise. How to keep kids in school? Well, kids, I believe, are fundamentally very smart. And if they see school being taught by people who themselves are not interested in it, people who cannot do very well at teaching, if what they're being taught has no practical application, then why should they do it? So, for example, there's an awful lot of kids graduating high school who go into entry-level jobs in the service economy, waiting on tables, slinging hash, and so on. Now, do they get more money if they were good in second-year algebra? The answer is no. And they understand that. If there were more jobs that required this kind of education, there would be more kids who would go into that kind of education with some enthusiasm. If there were a connection between how well you did in school and how fast your salary increased later, as there is in many countries, kids would be much more interested.
The space program languish in the last 10 or 15 years, as we have let all sorts of social programs languish, as we have permitted the amount of poverty in children to increase. Before the end of this century, more than half the kids in America may be below the poverty line. What kind of a future do we build for the country if we raise all these kids as disadvantaged, as unable to cope with the society, as resentful for the injustice served up to them? This is stupid.
And then what happened with the resources is they went into increasing budgets for arms. Isn't that where the money went?
That and making rich people richer. Those are the two places.
Well, the thing about rich people, and being one, I guess, is the money all gets reinvested. If you've got money, you put it in the bank lends it out to people to buy homes or cars or whatever.
Not poor people. But not poor people.
Well, that's a good point.
It tends to stay up at that highly stratified, very...
More people get employed with capital formation and so forth. Are you a socialist?
I'm not sure what a socialist is,
well,
but I believe that the government has a responsibility to care for the people. And I'm not talking about dole. I'm talking about making people self-reliant, people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It chooses to have homeless people. We are 19th in the world in infant mortality. 18 other countries save the lives of their babies better than we. How come? They just spend more money on it. They care about their babies more than we care about ours. I think it's a disgrace.
Viewers of this program do to make a difference in correcting these problems?
They can make sure that candidates who don't understand and aren't deeply committed to ending and reversing the nuclear arms race, to stopping greenhouse warming, and to stopping the depletion of the ozonosphere, that those guys aren't, men and women, are not elected. It's not enough to have a candidate say, I'm an environmentalist. In what way are you an environmentalist, Mr. or Ms. candidate? Take a look at the most recent election. There we had a candidate who said that he was an environmentalist. He, in contrast to the previous 8 years, where we had an uncompromising anti-environmentalist in the White House, okay, now there's a president, Mr. Bush, who at least acknowledges that there's a problem. We didn't even know that from listening to Mr. Reagan. But if you look at Mr. Bush's budget, we see not a hint of any real commitment to the environment. So I say in a democracy, that's the most important thing a person can do. There are a lot of other things a person can do. You can plant trees. Every individual can plant trees. That's something that's very constructive. You can boycott industries which are irresponsible on global warming and on chlorofluorocarbons. There are many things people can do, but they have to understand the issue before they can do those things.
Well,
you know, we humans come and go and briefly set foot on the stage and then exit, and but that's just very small potatoes compared to what the Earth is involved with and knows about. I think the essence of the scientific method is the willingness to admit you're wrong, the willingness to abandon ideas that don't work, and the essence of religion is not to change anything. The supposed truths are handed down by some revered figure, and then no one is supposed to make any progress beyond that, because all the truth is thought to be in hand.
I'm really talking about setting an agenda for the future.
My sense is that the scientific way of thinking, questioning, some delicate mix of creative encouragement of new ideas
and the most rigorous and skeptical scrutiny of new and old ideas, I think that is the path to the future, not just for science, but for all human institutions. We have to be willing to challenge because we are in desperate need of change. Humans have been on this planet for something like 1 million years, and for the vast bulk of that time, things changed extremely slowly. The population increased very slowly, our technology increased, improved, but by very slow steps. And just recently, you know, this is what's called an exponential. It's flat for a long time, and then boom, you suddenly get a huge increase. Increase in population, increase in technology, increase in pollution, increase in our powers to disturb the environment, to change the planetary environment. But we're the same old human beings as we were 1,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago. Not much has changed with us. And so it's very hard for us to catch on that there's a new situation and we have to adapt to it. On the other hand, that's one thing we humans are good at, adapting, figuring out. We're smart. That's our principal advantage over all the other species. I mean, we're not faster, stronger, better diggers. We don't fly all by ourselves. What we do is figure out and build because of our hands. And so I think there's certainly a chance of getting out of this mess, but not by business as usual, not by the idea that we shouldn't plan ahead, not by the idea that anybody can do whatever the hell they want and it doesn't affect the environment. There has to be a new way of looking at the world.
The resources is they went into increasing budgets for arms. Isn't that where the money went?
That and making rich people richer. Those are the two places.
Well, the thing about rich people, and being one, I guess, is the money all gets reinvested. If you've got money, you put it in a bank. The bank lends it out to people to buy homes or cars or whatever.
Not poor people. But not poor people.
Well, that's a good point.
It tends to stay up at that highly stratified, very...
More people get employed with capital formation and so forth. Are you a socialist?
I'm not sure what a socialist is,
well,
but I believe that the government has a responsibility to care for the people. I'm not talking about dole. I'm talking about making people self-reliant, people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It chooses to have homeless people. We are 19th in the world in infant mortality. 18 other countries save the lives of their babies better than we. How come? They just spend more money on it. They care about their babies more than we care about ours. I think it's a disgrace. And this country has vast wealth. You just look at what something like Star Wars. The money spent on Star Wars, already spent $20 billion on it. If these guys are permitted to go ahead, they will spend $1 trillion on Star Wars. Think of what that money could be used for to educate, to help, to bring people up to a sense of self-confidence, to improve not just the happiness of people in America, but their economic standing, to improve the competitiveness of the United States compared to other countries. We are using money for the wrong stuff.
Do you think that there's life anywhere else in the universe?
Well, think is a strong word. If you look at how many other worlds there are, how many stars in the Milky Way galaxy, how likely it is that most of them most of them have planets. How many other galaxies there are, it seems the height of human arrogance to imagine that this planet is the only inhabited world. But at the same time, we don't know of life elsewhere yet. We're just at the very earliest stages of exploration, and we've not found life anywhere else. We've sent spacecraft, as I said before, to a wonderful, exquisite array of other worlds. We've learned an enormous amount from them. We find on some of them the chemicals necessary for the origin of life, you know, the stirrings, the intimations of life, but no sign of life. We've also used big radio telescopes to see if anybody is sending us a radio message, and both of those efforts have not yet succeeded, so we haven't found life elsewhere. I would think a universe in which we are the only living things is much more incredible than a universe just burgeoning, overflowing with life. But we can't be sure. It's an experimental question. It has to be addressed experimentally. And that's one of the reasons that I'm such an advocate for sending spacecraft to other worlds and for using large radio telescopes to listen for signals.
And you can see it. This is, it looks like more than a dot, but it is in fact less than a pixel, a single picture element in size. In this color picture you can see that it is slightly blue, and this is where we live, on a blue dot. Astronomy has always been said to be a humbling experience, and I think these pictures underscore that point. And the next slide. Oh, no, it was lightning fast. Can we go back to that? That's it. So here are the 6 of the 9 planets imaged in this portrait. The 3 smallest planets, Mercury, Mars, and Pluto, we were unable to photograph. The appearance of the Earth in this pseudo sunbeam is just an accident. It was no special significance is to be attributed to a beam of light lighting it up. All, of course, are in reflected sunlight. Well, on that blue dot, that's where everyone you know and everyone you ever heard of and every human being who ever lived out their lives. It's a very small stage in a great cosmic arena. And again, just speaking for myself, I think this perspective underscores our responsibility to preserve and cherish that blue dot, the only home we have.
They can make sure that candidates who don't understand and aren't deeply committed to ending and reversing the nuclear arms race, to stopping greenhouse warming, and to stopping the depletion of the ozonosphere, that those guys aren't, men and women, are not elected. It's not enough to have a candidate say, I'm an environmentalist. In what way are you an environmentalist, Mr. or Ms. candidate? Take a look at the most recent election. There we had a candidate who said that he was an environmentalist. He, in contrast to the previous 8 years, where we had an uncompromising anti-environmentalist in the White House. Okay, now there's a president, Mr. Bush, who at least acknowledges that there's a problem. We didn't even know that from listening to Mr. Reagan. But if you look at Mr. Bush's budget, we see not a hint of any real commitment to the environment. So I say in a democracy, that's the most important thing a person can do. There are a lot of other things a person can do. You can plant trees. Every individual can plant trees. That's something that's very constructive. You can boycott industries which are irresponsible on global warming and on chlorofluorocarbons. There are many things people can do, but they have to understand the issue before they can do those things.
Well, it's always used as an argument to make no changes whatever. Any change will lose jobs. So, for example, the A-12, the Navy fighter that was just canceled because it was absurdly over its cost estimates. There will be thousands of aerospace workers who will lose their jobs. Is that a good reason to pour additional billions of dollars into this rat hole? No, it's not. And if we were really concerned about losing jobs, we would have a federal job retraining program. We would have much better education at all levels in science and technology so people could move from one job to another. But we're not interested in that. The losing job argument is just trotted out for political convenience so that we don't have to make a change. No question, there are massive changes needed. Other countries seem perfectly able to make those changes, but we are not.
There's not a single verified or checked out report which is at all connectable with the possibility of extraterrestrial life. It doesn't say that I think extraterrestrial life is impossible. Quite the contrary. I think that many of the stars in the sky have planetary systems. We know enough now about the origin of life to make it appear likely that life arises naturally on the vast bulk of these planets. It's possible, but by no means certain, that life on many of these planets evolves into beings which are as advanced as we, or more advanced. And I don't see any reason why we can't imagine that there are civilizations thousands or millions of years in advance of ourselves, capable of technical feats that we can hardly imagine. If you would believe, as the flying saucer cultists would have us believe, that the majority of the saucer reports are due to visitations, then you have a very strange situation. That means several spaceships are coming to the Earth over interstellar distances every day, as if all the anthropologists in the world were to converge on one of the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean because they just invented the fishnet there or something. I think it's much more reasonable if you want to speculate on the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence, that there are very rare visits from extraterrestrials to the Earth. There's no evidence for this. I just say that's not implausible. But to have several visits a day, I think, is straining credulity.
Well, it's certainly what I'm talking about in the demon-haunted world. My feeling, Charlie, is that it's not that pseudoscience and superstition and New Age so-called beliefs and fundamentalist zealotry are something new. They've been with us for as long as we've been human. But we live in an age based on science and technology with formidable technological powers.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
That's right. And if we don't understand it, by we I mean the general public, if it's something that, oh, I'm not good at that, I don't know anything about it, then who is making all the decisions about science and technology that are going to determine what kind of future our children live in? Just some members of Congress? But there's no more than a handful of members of Congress with any background in science at all. And the Republican Congress has just abolished its own Office of Technology Assessment, the organization that gave them bipartisan, competent advice on science and technology. They say, we don't want to know. Don't tell us about science and technology.
Surprising, because Gingrich is genuinely interested, I think, in these kinds of things as a, out of his own intellectual curiosity. Does the president still have a science advisor?
He does, John Gibbons, and the vice president is scientifically literate. Yes,
scientifically, a science maven. I mean, you blast them all. Creationist, Christian scientists who you say would rather allow their children to suffer than give them insulin or antibiotics. Astrologers come in for particular scorn on your part.
Well, I would say scorn, just derision.
Derision. A more generous version of scorn. But what's the danger of all this? I mean, this is not the thing that...
There's two kinds of dangers. One is what I just talked about, that we've arranged a society based on science and technology, in which nobody understands anything about science and technology, and this combustible mixture of ignorance and power, sooner or later, is going to blow up in our faces. I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson laid great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a Constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
But what's your personal opinion? Put you on the spot a little bit.
I'm a scientist, so I say I go where the evidence goes, not what I personally would like to do.
What is the evidence as you interpret it?
I would love to believe.
Your theory.
I would love to believe that there was a God who made us, who's looking out for us.
And loves us.
Loves us.
We need
takes
love.
care of us. And
makes us intelligent, guides us, and keeps us.
Such a mess. We're doing things so wrong. Then we would be relieved of the responsibility of taking care of ourselves.
The voice would come from up above and say,
don't pollute the atmosphere, stop the chlorofluorocarbons.
Weapons.
That's right. But that does not seem to be the case.
We have to solve our own problems.
We have to solve our own problems. Now, on the question of the origin of life, there's been some very interesting progress made. On the early Earth, there are two different ways in which the stuff of life, the molecules that lead to life, are made. One, it seems very clear, it was made in the primitive atmosphere, lightning, ultraviolet light falling on the Earth, that kind of stuff. And the other way is, it fell from the skies, because at the time of the origin of the Earth, comets, a lot of debris was being swept up. The solar system was a lot more traffic in it than there is now. And a lot of that debris, we know from the exploration of Halley's Comet, for example, comets are very rich in organic matter. So the stuff of life was falling on the Earth. Now, is that the hand of God or not? Well, if you believe in God, God established the physical laws of the universe, and chemistry is a consequence of physics, so all those molecules that led to life were made by God. It's possible to believe that. I'm not opposed to that idea, but I just say there is no evidence for it. And where there's no evidence, I say keep an open mind. Don't commit yourself in the absence of compelling evidence.
Imagine a room awash in gasoline. And there are two implacable enemies in that room. One of them has 9,000 matches. The other has 7,000 matches. Each of them is concerned about who's ahead, who's stronger. Well, that's the kind of situation we are actually in. The amount of weapons that are available to the United States and the Soviet Union are so bloated, so grossly in excess of what's needed to dissuade the other, that if it weren't so tragic, it would be laughable. What is necessary is to reduce the matches and to clean up the gasoline.
Now, I want to say there is a historical perspective which suggests, as bad as our problems are, the nuclear arms race, the environmental issues, as bad as all that is, there is some reason for hope. There was once slavery on the planet. It is largely gone. There was once human sacrifice. There was once the divine right of kings. There was lots of stuff that today we consider...
Oppression of women.
Absolutely. I'm sorry I didn't say that. But all of that is changing. And we can change these issues too, because our lives depend on it. We're smart enough, we're dedicated enough to do it, but not by sitting on our duffs. We have to really work. The system was a lot more traffic in it than there is now. And a lot of that debris, we know from the exploration of Halley's Comet, for example, comets are very rich in organic matter. So the stuff of life was falling on the Earth. Now, is that the hand of God or not? Well, if you believe in God, God established the physical laws of the universe, and chemistry is a consequence of physics, so all those molecules that led to life were made by God. It's possible to believe that. I'm not opposed to that idea, but I just say there is no evidence for it. And where there's no evidence, I say keep an open mind. Don't commit yourself in the absence of compelling evidence.
This is the first moment in the entire history of the human species when we've explored firsthand, I mean, not humans, but our machines, our robots, sending back the data, the environment we live in. We have examined every planet from Mercury out to Neptune. We have examined 70 moons and some comets and some asteroids. Never before has that been done. There's only one first time. That's our generation.
But what has it taught us?
It's taught us, you take a look at Venus,
Yeah.
you see a world with a surface temperature of 900 degrees Fahrenheit, produced by a massive carbon dioxide greenhouse effect, and never again will you be tempted to believe a radio talk show hosts who say that the greenhouse effect is something invented
Somebody's
by liberals.
imagination is
That's
not a
right,
danger.
by liberals. You look at Mars, and you see a planet without an ozone layer, in which ultraviolet light from the sun has in effect fried the surface so that even organic molecules cannot survive there. And never again will you say that there's no danger to
The puncture in
depleting
the
our
ozone layer,
ozone
right.
layer. We learn about our world by examining other worlds. So what should you do? First thing you should do is stop producing CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. See, they do double duty. Not only do they destroy the ozone layer, they are an important greenhouse gas. They'll get us one way or another. So we should stop producing them. Secondly, to mitigate greenhouse warming, we should use fossil fuels more efficiently. By that I mean, if I had a car that went 70 miles a gallon instead of one that went 25 miles a gallon, I would not be putting as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for each mile that I go in driving my car. This is a kind of technological solution or mitigation of the problem. Then we should grow trees. Trees take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We need massive reforestation on a global scale. Instead, what we are doing right now is destroying an acre of forest every second. Think about that for just a second. There goes an acre. A whole acre of forest every second, day after day, year after year. We're being extremely stupid. By their very nature, these assaults on the environment were not caused by any one political group or any one generation. Intrinsically, they are transnational, transgenerational, and trans-ideological. So are all conceivable solutions. To escape these traps requires a perspective that embraces the peoples of the planet and all the generations yet to come. Problems of such magnitude and solutions demanding so broad a perspective must be recognized from the outset as having a religious as well as a scientific dimension. Mindful of our common responsibility, we scientists, many of us long engaged in combating the environmental crisis, urgently appeal to the world religious community to commit in word and in deed, and as boldly as is required, to preserve the environment of the earth. Some of the short-term mitigations of these dangers, such as greater energy efficiency, rapid banning of chlorofluorocarbons, or modest reductions in the nuclear arsenals, are comparatively easy and, at least at some level, are already underway. But other, more far-reaching, more long-term, more effective approaches will encounter widespread inertia, denial, and resistance. In this category are conversion from fossil fuels to a non-polluting energy economy, a continuing swift reversal of the nuclear arms race, and a voluntary halt to world population growth, without which many of the other approaches to preserve the environment will be nullified. As on issues of peace, human rights, and social justice, religious institutions can here too be a strong force encouraging national and international initiatives in both the private and public sectors, and in the diverse worlds of commerce, education, culture, and mass communication. The environmental crisis requires radical changes, not only in public policy, but also in individual behavior. The historical record makes clear that religious teaching, example, and leadership are powerfully able to influence personal conduct and commitment. As scientists, many of us have had profound experiences of awe and reverence before the universe. We understand that what is regarded as sacred is more likely to be treated with care and respect. Our planetary home should so be regarded. Efforts to safeguard and cherish the environment need to be infused with a vision of the sacred. At the same time, a much wider and deeper understanding of science and technology is needed. If we do not understand the problem, it is unlikely we will be able to fix it. Thus, there is a vital role for both religion and science. And then the last paragraph reads, "We know that the well-being of our planetary environment is already a source of profound concern in your councils and congregations. We hope this appeal will encourage a spirit of common cause and joint action to help preserve the Earth."
Here's this spacecraft that has flown by the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune systems.
Right.
Is on its way, astonishingly, to the stars, a triumph of human engineering. We turn the cameras back and take a photograph of the planet from where it came.
Yeah.
And we can barely see it. Here it is, a fragile, delicate, pale blue dot, and that's where we live. That's where every human has ever lived, and you can see the vulnerability at a glance. And that gives a
humbling and I think character-building sense of where we are.
Humbling because it says that we're only one small portion of something that is enormously large?
Absolutely. And let me say a word about what that is. This dot is one of 9 planets that goes around a humdrum star that lives at the outskirts of a perfectly ordinary galaxy, which is composed of 400 billion other stars in a universe of maybe 100 billion galaxies. Yeah. And recent thoughts suggest this universe one of a very large number, perhaps an infinite number of other closed-off universes. Yeah. In that context, what is the chance that we are the center or the point of the universe? If there was no concept of having stewardship of the Earth 1,000,000 years ago, today there is at least a very great need. If you stand back from the Earth, as those Apollo astronauts did in the late 60s, and photograph the Earth from a distance in space so you can see the whole Earth, there's this blue aura that you can see surrounding the day-lit hemisphere. And it's just the atmosphere seen edge on. And what is most impressive, what many astronauts have remarked upon, is how thin, how fragile, how vulnerable it seems. The thickness of the Earth's atmosphere compared to the size of the Earth is about the same as the thickness of a coat of shellac on a library globe of the Earth. There isn't much air. And so we now have the prospect of inadvertently endangering the life-supporting environment, the environment that supports the human species and many other species, of committing what religious people sometimes call crimes against creation. There is, of course, a role for individuals, and that is one of the blessings of democracies. And that is, individuals can play their part by voting out of office recalcitrant politicians. It's very straightforward. I can't improve the greenhouse effect much on my own, by my own energy economy at home. I can make some contribution, but I can make a bigger contribution by voting against politicians who say that they can't do anything about this problem. It is important for us, humans, to be out there. And the reasons are, I can quickly say what they are. First is, we are an exploratory species. The last 10,000 years we've been sitting around in civilization. Before that, for the last few 100,000 years, we were wanderers, explorers, nomads, and that is in our blood. And spaceflight is an opportunity, the only one open to us, to continue that long human tradition. Secondly, that technology I was talking about can pose a danger to ourselves. We inhabit a very thin protective atmosphere. Our technology can destroy that environment that protects us. I don't for a moment say that the Earth is a disposable planet. We have to make the most heroic efforts to preserve it and us. But I still think it would be a good insurance policy, hedging our bets, or as Republicans like to say, diversifying our portfolios, for there to be humans on other worlds as well as here. And finally, there's a specific identifiable hazard that, again, not in 10 years, but in hundreds or thousands starts to become worrisome. And that is that the Earth will be hit by a large asteroid or comet, and if we're ever going to deal with that, we have to be in space. Put all that together, and I see on a time scale of decades to centuries, we really have to have a significant presence. On the other hand, there's not something that we can do as individuals. I cannot go and drive a 75-mile-per-gallon automobile because they are not commercially available. So it's no good to tell me, as my friend Mr. Riley did, that we shouldn't complain to the government or the industry. We should just do it ourselves. How shall I go about by myself driving a 75 mile per gallon automobile? I'll be glad to take instruction on this issue. I'm ready. But seems to me this requires some activity in Washington and Detroit.
I would say that there are several lines of approach, all of which look promising and should be pursued further. One is laboratory work on the question of the origin of life, making the molecules which here were able to reproduce themselves and led eventually to us. Secondly, a study of the organic chemistry in places like Jupiter, comets, and the interstellar medium. It's remarkable that the molecules of life are littering the cosmos. Thirdly, the space vehicle exploration of the neighboring planets, in particular for life or life-related compounds. If it turns out, for example, that Mars is lifeless, that is not a major disappointment, because then we have two planets near each other in space and time, life developed on one and not on the other. You have the classic case of an experiment and a control, and it'd be very important to investigate why life on the Earth and not on Mars. But even more exciting would be if Mars turns out to have life, for us to investigate what kind of life it is, how similar, how different from life on Earth. That will immensely broaden the science of biology. And then there is certainly the serious work, long-term, patient, cautious investigation of other stars for possible signals being sent our way.
Ultimately, we're going to want to phase out fossil fuels. We're going to want to convert to an alternative energy economy. And what that is, we can still discuss, but in my view, it is unlikely to be nuclear power for all the obvious pollution concerns. And much more promising is solar power, which produces no greenhouse gases and does not involve radioactivity, and is already economically competitive with fossil fuels if we take account of the environmental cost of the burning of those fossil fuels. That's the kind of technology we should be after, and incidentally, because developing countries tend to be located in equatorial latitudes where there's more sunlight, this is also an ideal kind of technology, and could be for them, and could be much more indigenous, that is, the technology homegrown, than big fission or fusion reactors.
We are an exploratory species. We wish to understand who we are, where we are, what our surroundings are. When you study other worlds, you learn much more about your own. You provide an aperture to a benign future, and all of this can be done at the tiniest fraction of what we seem quite happy to spend on military systems. To give you an example, in March of next year, Halley's Comet will be coming by the Earth for the first time since 1910, and it will be greeted by a flotilla of 5 spacecraft from 20 nations, including the United Kingdom, but not including the United States. Why not the United States, the pioneer in solar system exploration in the history of the human species? Why not? Because a Democratic and a Republican administration decided it was too expensive. How expensive would it have been? It would have cost exactly as much as a single B-1 bomber, for which the United States is committed to purchase 100. 99 would have compromised national security. Very difficult to estimate, but there are stars which are billions of years older than our sun. Some of them very likely have planets, and therefore I can imagine civilizations immensely beyond the capabilities of our own. What capabilities those are, no one can tell, in the same sense that even the most fantastic prognostications from the middle of the 19th century about the technology of the 20th century all fell short. People like Jules Verne, asked to imagine what transportation devices people would have in 1950, imagined a kind of Victorian living room, yes, with plush velvet furniture in a gondola at the bottom of an enormous balloon which went from New York to San Francisco in only a few weeks. And he was, of course, the most imaginative speculative thinker of the 19th century. Others would have been more cautious. So it's very difficult to predict far into the future, even 100 years, when not only new technology, but new scientific principles may be discovered.
But the thing that I find most striking is the enormous, remarkable capability of virtually every small child for learning. They start out eager, intellectually wide-eyed, asking extremely clever questions about the world. And then something happens, by and large, to discourage them. And I think it's a tremendous waste of natural resources. For example, a kid asks, Mommy, why is the grass green? And very often you get an answer like, oh, don't ask dumb questions, or who knows, when in fact it's an extremely profound question. And how much better would it be?
Why is the sky blue, or anything like that?
In both those cases, it goes to the fundamentals, in one case of biology, in the other of a kind of physics. How much better it would be to say to the child, that's a good question, Johnny. I don't know the answer. Maybe we can look it up. Or nobody knows. Maybe when you grow up, you'll be the person to find out. I think kids who are discouraged from asking those questions wind up learning the lesson that there's something bad about using the mind, and we lose resources. And we need those intellectual resources because we are in very perilous times. And I think the complex and subtle problems that we face can only have complex and subtle solutions. Right. And we need people able to think complex and subtle thoughts. And I believe a great many children have that capability if only they're encouraged. The Milky Way galaxy is composed of some 400, I'm converting from American numbers to British numbers, 400,000 million separate suns, each of which more or less like our own. We now think that planets are commonplace, that most of those stars probably have planetary systems. We know the origin of life is likely under general cosmic circumstances, and there were thousands of millions of years for evolution to happen. Under those circumstances, it seems extraordinarily arrogant of us to think we are the only inhabitants of this cosmos.
How are we going to find them, though? I mean,
okay, there's two questions.
How are they going to find us?
Right. The first thing to bear in mind is that sort of tooling around the galaxy in spacecraft is a very inefficient way to do it. And what's more, as you said, no way for them to know anything interesting is happening here. But there's another way, and that is to use a technology which you know well, and that is radio. Radio signals travel at the speed of light. We could broadcast the Encyclopedia Britannica to the nearest star in a week with existing technology. We could communicate, if you wanted to do that, you could communicate to any star in the galaxy with the technology not much beyond our own. And therefore, the way to do this is for them, the smart guys, to send radio messages, and for us, the dumb guys, to listen. Yeah. And that's what we're doing. And it's so inexpensive.
But there's no sound coming through this.
No, not sound, radio.
Radio, yeah. But they're not coming through. We haven't heard any bleeps.
Well, but we've just begun to listen. Well, there's two ways. One is its enormous gravity. A black hole is a place where the gravity is so intense that even light can't get out, so it's completely dark. But if it's revolving around some other object that is shining, right, then by the gravitational tugs that the black hole makes on this other star, you can detect its presence. And another thing that happens is that black holes tend to have disks of matter surrounding them, in which the friction generates X-rays. And one of the candidate black holes, something called Cygnus X1, both does this gravitational pull and is a source of X-rays, and very likely is an example of the legendary black hole.
Yeah, then there was the theory that once you enter a black hole, you could go into another universe or to another time frame. I suppose that's science fiction so far?
Well, there are some people who seriously think that if you were to slip down into a black hole and could survive the trip, which is highly unlikely, that you would emerge somewhere else in space and when else in time.
Greenhouse warming is the buildup of invisible gases. Their invisibility is precisely part of the problem because you can't just by looking see that there's a danger, which keep the heat in and build up the temperature of the Earth, producing great regions of drought in continental interiors, including the American Midwest, and through the volume expansion of seawater and the melting of polar ice, sea level rising. And some of the projections for the end of the next century are extremely serious drought, the destruction of croplands worldwide, an assault on natural ecosystems, and a rising of sea level sufficient to, for example, flood Bangladesh and produce tens of millions of environmental refugees. Maybe not. Maybe there's some undiscovered mistake that all of the scientists involved in these models are making. It's not impossible. We can't be 100% sure. But which is more prudent? Which is wiser? To do nothing and hope that a mistake has been made? Or to take these predictions seriously, even if there's a chance the precautions you will take will be unnecessary?
I think that's very important, the idea that we have information stored outside of our bodies. For most of the history of life on this planet, the organisms had almost all the information they had to deal with in their genes, hereditary information, instinct. Then about maybe 100 million years ago, a little longer ago than that, there came to be a reptile that for the first time in the history of life had more information in its brains than in its genes. And that was a major step symbolically in the evolution of life on this planet. Well, now we have an organism, us, which can store more information outside the body altogether than inside the body, and that's in books and computers and television video cassettes. And that extraordinarily expands our ability to understand what's happening and to manipulate, control our environment if we do it wisely for human benefit. The whole idea of what happens when you read a book I find absolutely stunning. Here's some product of a tree with little black squiggles on it. Right. You open it up, and inside your head is the voice of someone speaking who may have been dead 3,000 years. And yet there he is talking directly to you. What a magical thing that is.
Problems are very serious. They are happening, however, slow enough that it's possible to do something about it. The slowness is an advantage in that respect, but a great disadvantage in another respect, in that the changes are occurring on timescales longer than the terms of office of politicians. If a politician can take a presumed unpopular action, which will, in his or her estimation, benefit the politician while still in office, then that's the kind of risk that politicians are willing to take. If the benefit, however, happens 10 or 30 or 50 years in the future to benefit some other office holder, then from the narrow perspective of getting reelected, it's not nearly so attractive. These long timescales represent one of the novel problems of these global environmental issues.
It's an interesting question. Which organism would replace us if we wiped ourselves selectively out? An old professor of mine, H.J. Muller, geneticist, said he thought it was between the raccoons and the bears. And they're both very clever and do many different things. But my feeling is that the great apes, chimps, gorillas are so close to us already that they have a big head start if that were to happen. I hope it won't happen. And the way you guarantee that it doesn't happen is by using the kind of intelligence that nature has already given us.